This time we're doing things a little bit differently. I've just been in Singapore just a few weeks ago, and during my trip there, we teamed up with local coffee company Asylum, and we did a bunch of different coffee events. And what we're going to show you here is actually a series of 3 different videos in 3 different parts, where we discuss different aspects of coffee pretty much. The first one is what they refer to as the Battle of the Brewer. So it's me talking about just different pour-over methods and the different qualities and kind of aspects that comes with that. The second one, it's focused on green coffee, sourcing, and we're all kind of doing a long cupping together, discussing certain taste profiles and where flavors in coffee actually comes from. And the last and final one, number 3, is a little bit of a Q&A/book presentation where I share more about the story behind April, how we ended up where we are today, and just an open Q&A with the people that were kind enough to join us at that event.
Give a round of applause to Patrik, please. Yeah.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. First of all, thank you to these guys for bringing me here. I was in Manila for a short time before this, and we thought it would be super cool to come over. This guy occupied our Copenhagen store for way too long, so I had to almost kick him out. And we ended up having dinner together, which was lovely.
It was fun.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I've been always kind of wanting to come to Singapore because Singapore is awesome, which I think is confirmed after being here for a few days now. It's really cool. Love the food. Interesting coffee scene as well.
Yes.
And while I was here, we thought we would do some stuff. So we've been doing some brewing events all over town. And today we're going to do a lot of coffee stuff, pretty much.
A lot of coffee stuff.
Yes.
Yes.
And I think we're going to start by, hey guys.
Hi, grab a seat anywhere you want.
Jump in.
Sitting here in the corner. Back there, there's 2 more seats.
Wherever you guys
Alvin's hogging a seat in front. No, I'm kidding. No, don't. I'm kidding. Reserve your seat.
No, go for it. No. So basically the plan, what we're doing here now in the first session is that we're going to talk about coffee brewing, because I'm kind of into coffee brewing. And then these guys want me to talk about other brewers, which I will talk about.
Yes.
No, it's interesting, right? So we're going to try to... So I'm going to try to break down a little bit why on earth did I make a coffee brewer in the first place, and why is that kind of important, and a little bit of the theory that kind of goes into it, because it is a little bit complicated. And then we're going to try to actually do a little bit of comparison, because we have a bunch of different coffee brewers in the industry, and sometimes it's hard for people, I think, to relate to the differences, understand the differences. So we're going to be quite nerdy here today. I know you guys have a different level of understanding for coffee brewing, most likely. You're always welcome to shoot questions throughout the session. We're supposed to be a little bit interactive here, so you're more than welcome to. We're also going to try, let's see if that works out, to kind of have you guys up and taste a little bit as well. Because in the end of the day, when it comes to coffee, it's all in the cup. Yep. Pretty much, right? Me just talking is quite irrelevant unless we're able to actually taste it or experience it, right?
Yes.
And Stuart here is going to hang around.
I am.
Because coffee brewing is...
if you don't like my face, I will hide under the table and talk, but I'm going to talk a little bit.
So coffee brewing is a social thing, right?
Yes.
It's always more fun to do it together, right? So if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to actually go with it, right? So these sessions are here for you guys to know stuff and learn stuff about coffee. I already know my shit about coffee, right? Good or bad. But really, take advantage of it, right? Cool. So I'm going to start from the beginning. Not all the way from the beginning, because it's a long story. I was born in Gothenburg on a dark morning.
Okay, so when we designed this thing, the coffee salon session, this is the second one. Some of you have been for the first. It was born out of when we were starting Asylum and we were figuring out what to brew on. Everyone said the V60 right at the start. And for the first, I think, year while we were doing it, we found that it was really difficult for the baristas to all pull out cups, the same consistent cups that we wanted. And because it is what it is, there's a lot of channeling for the cone-shaped stuff. And you do have to have some kind of skill to pull on the V60, I feel, and the recipe being consistent and all that. And so then we went on a hunt and a search. So that's why a lot of these are ours. Some of them are new, but we've been playing around with a lot of brewers. And we eventually landed up at the April's doorstep. And this was in the glass brewer before he got the plastic one. And consistent, very easy to do, and consistent, clear, balanced cups. I know it's a bit biased, but that's, for me, translating wise, for my baristas, I could get them to each one pull a very similar cup, which I'm happy with when we're doing service.
Which is kind of the whole point, right? And when it comes to, like, first of all, before we deep dive into this, you can obviously brew a very acceptable cup of coffee with every kind of coffee brewer, right? So we're not here to say that one brewer is shit. It's not quite as easy as that, right? When I create stuff, it's always a very egoistic process. It's like, how can I make coffee that I think tastes better, right? We know by now that coffee is something that everyone is appreciating slightly differently, right? So it's not necessarily about talking about right or wrongs. I'm just going to try to explain like why I do what I do, and then it's kind of up to you guys to either apply that to what you do or not, right? And for me, when it comes to brewing coffee, everything starts with competitions. So I like to try to win coffee competitions. I'm not very good at winning them, but I like to try, right? And I tried to win the World Brewers Cup for a while. I haven't stopped trying, but I'm past that for barista. And part of that process was exploring how can I brew better coffee, right? And when you compete, there's a few things that are very important, which goes into the idea of why I created my brewer the way I did. And it's the fact that we actually serve coffee to 3 judges at the same time. So that's important. So I'm basically supposed to brew 3 individual cups of coffee that are actually identical, right? So consistency is like key. They want sweet coffee, they want balanced coffee, they want coffee that tastes really good in lower temperatures. Because when you brew coffee in competition, they're gonna try it in hot, warm, and cold. Cold being basically room temperature, right? So my kind of journey with trying to compete in this competition started with like the 2 most basic brewers on earth. I think brewers that most of us have used, which would be the V60 and the Kalita. I'm not a chemist guy, will never be a chemist guy. Beautiful little thing, but it just doesn't make tasty coffee. So we're not talking about chemists today. But basically I spent the better part of 6 months to brew, measure, control up to 1,000 individual cups of coffee, benchmarking the V60 and the Kalita, pretty much. That's how all of this started. And very simply put, it came down to either a cone shape or a flatbed brewer, right? And there's a few really kind of significant differences between the two, mainly the shape, right? And why is the shape important? Well, the shape is important because it affects the coffee bed. So when you work with a V60, you work with a cone shape, right? So you're gonna work with a relatively deep coffee bed. Having a deep coffee bed makes saturation evenly very difficult. Mainly because I'm pouring water on the top, not on the bottom, right? So the challenge you have there is how the water goes from the top through the brewer and into the vessel, right? And the issue with them is that you're never gonna do that uniformly. So if you brew 3 at the same time, you're not gonna be uniform, pretty much. If you work with a cone brewer, you work with a much, much thinner bed of coffee because it's much wider, right? It's quite easy, right? And the idea then is basically to make the most uniform coffee bed is going to generate the most uniform taste experience. A truth with moderation, but what I found, which was really interesting, is the fact that when a cup cools down, when it's brewed by a flatbed brewer, it's going to be more balanced, it's going to be sweeter, and it's going to have better texture. When you brew my coffee, right? Also important, because it's not necessarily true on all coffees. It's not that simple. What's very important to understand when it comes to coffee roasting and coffee brewing is that how the coffee is roasted is dictating how the coffee should be brewed. There's a few key variables there. We're talking about density of the roasted coffee. We're talking about moisture levels of the roasted coffee. We're talking about color, agtron, or whatever way you measure it, of the roasted coffee. So all of this is going to affect solubility, but most importantly, all of this is going to affect how the coffee absorbs water. In very basic terms, a darker roasted coffee doesn't absorb as much water as a lighter roasted coffee. That's the very simple way to look at it. You can make it a lot more complicated, but that's the basics pretty much, right? So a lot of people when they brew coffee, they think, let's say, a Kenyan coffee should be grinded differently versus like a Brazilian coffee. That's not how we think about it. When we think about it, a coffee with this amount of moisture at this density that is rested for this amount of time and has this color is going to be grinded like this, right? So it's a few levels beyond that, right? Because it's not as easy as saying as certain ingredients are similar, because in the end of the day, it depends on what are you doing when you're roasting, right? Because all of the three measurements I just mentioned are all going to come out very different depending on who is roasting it, depending on what kind of machine you're roasting it, right? So I realized when working with the Kalita and the V60, which are both awesome and important brewers, especially Kalita, they do some pretty amazing stuff, actually, production-wise.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that later. They're amazing, but they're made a very long time ago. I wasn't born. And the style of roasting that was done back in the days is not what Apo is doing today. That was the main kind of understanding, right? So I was brewing all of these coffees, and I couldn't get my head around why isn't it tasting the way that I want to. And the solution was actually quite simple. It's because you're brewing with a brewer that is not supposed to make your coffee tasty, because it's not designed for my coffee, right? Which is very simple, right? Because if you look at how the Japanese culture roasts coffee today, and also how they roasted coffee back in like the 80s, it's quite different, right? So different coffees, different approaches. So I needed a brewer that could fit my coffee better, right? And one of the things with April coffee is that we roast kind of lighter than most, maybe, right? Even though evaluating coffee based on color is kind of doesn't make much sense. Then the measurements I mentioned are a lot more relevant, right? And what happens when you roast light from a competition perspective is that you have a lower body, you have lower intensity than some of these darker roasted coffees, right? So then you need to create a brewer that gives you a better intensity structure and a better body, right? It's all about that, right? So I started to do a bunch of models with a good friend of mine in Sweden.
I've never heard this story. So
You never had this story?
No, I never
Didn't
heard
you
this
read
story.
my book?
No.
What's wrong with you?
No. Yeah, I haven't read. Saffron's would have read the book. The book's on sale if you want it.
I did write a book about
he
this.
did write a book.
Yeah, if you like...
Tell me more. Tell me more of the story. Like
So basically, it's quite easy. So I brew these roughly 1,000 brewers, and like it's all logged. So I have all of this material still there, right? So basically, I do this over a period of about 4 to 6 months-ish. And then I decide for a Kalita, right? Then Kalita is really annoying to brew with because they clog up all the time. I'm not sure if you guys had that. And then you go, why on earth is this brewer clogging up? And then you go, let's just take a Kalita and do a massive hole in it, right? Because that makes sense, because it has these tiny, small holes. So you figure if you do really large holes, it's going to not happen, right? But then it still happens. And then you go, I just made a massive fucking hole here. Sorry for swearing. And it's still not coming out faster. Why is that? And that is a really interesting question. And there's a few interesting answers to that I kind of then figured out around, during the process. And one is the paper filter. Paper filter is super important, and we'll come back to that later. And two is the shape of the bottom structure, which we're also going to come back to, right? So basically, I start to make prototypes with a good friend of mine in Sweden. Well, now a good friend. I didn't know her before. And so she basically did like ceramic models for me. That was basically it. And this was about 3 months out of the World Championship-ish. We started kind of work for it. So we did some versions with like giant hole, basically a Kalita version like this.
Wait, this was 3 months before the competition.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
But the process is much longer, right? But it's about then I realized we need to fix this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So we start working with it. We drill these massive holes, and that doesn't work. We do these different cross stuff, and that doesn't work. We do different angles, and that doesn't work. And you go like, what is this? Like, what's wrong with this?
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, what I do is I start to look at the base of the brewer, and we actually change the structure, which again, we'll come back later, and all of a sudden everything changed. And that was super interesting. And then I was trying to figure out why did this change? Like, why is this so important? So then I talked to, and this is not in the book, then I talked to a guy at the university in Copenhagen, because I'm not a very smart guy. I know how to brew coffee, and that's about it. So I need someone that can actually explain what's happening here, right? And basically what you have when you brew coffee, which is something we don't mention so much, at least not in coffee brewing books, is that we discuss about what we call under pressure and over pressure. So let's say back to the chemics. How many here have like brewed coffee with the chemics? No.
Yeah, great.
Are you serious?
Yeah. brewed coffee with
If
a
I would say
Chemex.
that in the States or in Europe, everyone would go, yeah, sure.
Really?
Do we know what a Chemex is?
Oh, a Chemex.
Or am I just completely like a Chemex
Chemex.
brewer?
I thought I heard Chemex.
Has anyone watched like Friends?
No, Chemex. You guys use a Chemex before? Anyone use a Chemex?
It's like
Yes?
the world's most
Yeah.
famous coffee.
Yeah,
What
okay,
a terrible
Chemex.
example if no one knows what that is.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm just going to assume that you have used it.
We've seen it.
Yeah, and
Seen
then
it.
then what? Yeah, you see it, yeah. So okay, if you have used it, what happens? A terrible example. I'm going to do it anyway. So if you have used it, what happens is that when you keep on brewing, and in the beginning it goes through pretty fast, and then all of a sudden it just stops, and you go like, what is this? And then you take the paper filter and you lift it up a little bit, and then all of a sudden the coffee just goes through the filter super fast, right?
Yep.
That's just, yeah, someone knows. That's cool. And the reason for that is because you have a bunch of pressure that is building up from the hot liquid underneath. So the coffee that is brewing down, if I do this and I brew coffee, the coffee that is coming down here during my brew is building pressure that goes up. And if there's no way to alleviate that pressure, what's going to happen is that the brew will clog. Basically, you have too much resistance for the coffee to go down, right? So the main, or the first, at least, iteration of the April Brewer was really what I call the wings on the side. So we open up this.
Right.
Then there's, we can go really complicated and we can say, why do we have the exact measurements we have of the opening? It is a thing. And, so on and so on. Let's not get too geeky. But what happens is that it allows the steam to goes up.
Yep.
And that allows new coffee to go down, right? And then another thing with the Kalita that was really kind of struggling, Scarreo has a solution for this, which I don't like, but we can mention it anyway. He puts like this little metal disc like in the bottom of the brewer to like lift up the paper filter.
Right.
Now, I don't like metal in my coffee.
Yep.
Because it tastes like metal.
It does taste like metal.
Yeah,
Yes.
so I don't do it. So what we did instead was that we basically created 3 what we call filter holders, which is in the center. Do we like have any pieces
What,
of
the
the
glass?
brewer? Right. Maybe we can take the ones on the shelf and like send them around, and people
Yeah.
can like just look at them.
The April? All 3? Send them
why not?
around?
Just like boom, boom.
Nice.
If they want to have a look, then it's less me talking, and
They
you guys can
they
actually have a
hold
look at it.
Touch it. Please give it back.
Touch it, feel it, give it back, steal it, don't steal it. Now, just to get an idea, then you can see the wings in the bottom and the like filter holders in the center, right? So that's basically where it starts. And then you realize another thing, which Aurea has realized also, which we're going to discuss, I guess, a little bit later, is that the angle of the brewer makes a massive difference. So angle in terms of pressure is like super important. So angle translates to flow rate. Flow rate is how the water goes through the coffee. How the water that goes through the coffee is super important, right? This is important for dark roast and light roast and medium, whatever style of roasting you're using, right? So that's something that we always have to keep in mind when we brew coffee. Basically what we've done, simply explained, is that there is a mathematic equation that is calculating the pressure leaving the server versus going on top. And then the angles, the filter holder, and the holes are actually made to alleviate a perfect
How do you
pressure.
calculate this thing?
Well, I don't. Someone that knows these things.
So you got a guy.
I'm just going like, this tastes good.
Right.
So basically, what we did then, and it's about 100 prototypes.
Right.
In like ceramic first then, right? So what we do is that we do, 20 versions with different sizes of the holes in
Right.
the base.
Makes sense.
We do 20 versions with like a different inside, so like basically alleviating the paper filter differently.
Yep.
And then once we figure that out, we do 20 versions with a different angle
Yep.
on the shape, right? So
All this
it's-
is done in ceramics.
That's all in ceramics. Super expensive.
Yep.
You can't. I mean, you can 3D print, but that tastes really
Yep.
bad. So I don't want that.
Yep.
And it has to taste good, right? So that's basically the process. It's not much more difficult. And then basically when we started to figure out, okay, but these angles taste better,
Yep.
these holes taste better, and the combination of this tastes better, then we basically take in a lab dude that goes in and calculates, okay, but why is this?
Right.
So then he goes in and measures the pressures of what comes from the actual server and what goes up. And then we just measure the flow rates and the temperatures. It's kind of easy. Anyone can do it. You just need a lot of time.
Right.
You just need a lot of time. So basically, long story short, I go up in the World Championships because also important side note, I want to say, and not to kind of be pretentious here, but so we did not create a brewer and launched it to the market and just said our brewer is the best brewer in the world. So I created a brewer, went up in the World Championship, took second place. highest cup score though. And then I said, okay, this is probably a decent brewer. I'm going to launch it, right? And I think that's an important process for us in terms of building. We're not here to just like shove products out in the market just to sell them. We actually want to try to make our coffee better. And then we're happy if that can help other people make better coffee as well, right? But the key thing there, when it comes to that specific competition as well, was getting a really solid coffee in the cold temperature, getting a really aromatic cup as well, and perfectly integrated acidity. So acidity is one of those things where when we compete, the judges are often quite confused or not very happy with acidity in general, right? So what you want is a way of brewing and a style of brewing that basically integrates that acidity perfectly, right? I'm just going to walk through like a few other small details on like basic recipe ideas, and then I think maybe we do a brew.
Yes.
And then
paper filters.
Paper. We'll get to those as well. Paper filters, and then just talk a little bit about how we're brewing, because there's a few things to keep in mind if you want to brew like really tasty coffee, just in general. Rule number, good water, but that's a different conversation. We can have a full session on water. Water is important.
Yes.
Anyway, the dose and the volume of coffee you're brewing is crazy important. So when I compete, I brew very, very small brews, always. The smallest amount of coffee you can have in the paper filter, the better. And the reason for that is because it's easier for you to saturate all of the coffee uniformly.
Right.
So if I have a lot of coffee and pour water, it will take longer time for all of that coffee to be evenly saturated than if I have less coffee. It kind of makes perfect sense, right? And especially then if I'm brewing 3 at the same time, I want to be as uniform as possible, right? So if I have a 20-gram dose in 3 different brewers, it would be harder for me to be uniform than if I have 12 grams, right?
Yep.
Because there's less coffee to saturate. There's less coffee to saturate, there's less surface area, and that's going to be a lot easier, right? And taste a lot better. Tips from the coach. Another thing I do, which I think was quite different, and I believe we were one of the first to kind of introduce it to coffee brewing, was that initially, maybe still, people consider blooming coffee as a thing. How many here think like blooming coffee is a thing? I would assume everyone would raise their hand on this because it is a thing for most people. So it's not a thing, right? Let's be clear with what that is from a brewing perspective. So visually, for those of you that maybe don't know what it is, blooming is the idea of I'm pouring water on the coffee, the very first pour, and what's going to happen is the coffee is going to like swell up, right? That is referred to as a blooming. However, coffee is not tea brewing. We're not talking different flushes. We're not preparing the coffee for anything. That's not how it works, right? What happens when you brew coffee is that the initial part of the brew is going to be more aromatic. That will be more aromatic if you dump a liter of water or if you dump 100 grams of water or 10 grams of water. It doesn't really matter. That's just how it works, right? And one of the challenges with the idea of blooming is, one, you should not brew coffee that blooms anyway, because that means it's too fresh.
Yep.
Too fresh or too dark. So don't touch it. In the world of April.
Yeah.
Yes. So basically, let the coffee rest for at least 2 weeks, probably 3 weeks before you start brewing it, right? Lesson number 1. Step number 2, we brew a massive amount of water on the coffee in the first pour, right? So what I'm going to do here today is I'm going to do one of the basic kind of April recipes, which in this case is a little bit different dose-wise. I think we're at 13.5 grams today. Slightly different grinder, slightly different water. We have to kind of adapt. We're going to do 2 simple pours at 100 grams. So 100 and 100. Very simple, very tasty.
2 pours. Yep.
And the reason why that is tasty is because we're able to uniformly saturate all of that coffee almost at the same time over multiple brews, pretty much. And that's the key thing, right? So that's one of the main things in terms of how you're getting balance and how you're getting uniformity in your coffee, right? It's all about saturation, and it's all about making sure that that water is even for all of the coffees, right? Another thing to consider as well, because we also do different styles of pouring. When I've competed in the past, I've also done different stuff. So it's not that we always do the same thing. Basically, the more amount of water you have in the filter, the faster the flow rate. It kind of makes sense. You have more pressure, it's heavier, it's going to go down faster, right? And the other way around, right? And then on top of that, you're also going to have different styles of pouring techniques, which is circular and central. So when I went up in the World Championship, this was 2019, I started all of a sudden to pitch like circle pours and center pours. Before that, everyone was pitching like pulse pouring, right? So like 40 grams here, 60 grams here, 80 grams here, or whatever, right? And I went, well, how you pour the water on the coffee is going to make a massive difference, right? Yep. So what I do when I brew is that I'm alternating what I call circle and center pours. Circle pour is going to basically saturate more efficiently, more uniformly, cause a slower flow rate, more agitation. Center pour is going to push up the coffee on top, pretty much, which is causing a slight uneven extraction, but often helps with flavors. So you're getting slightly better intensity. So if I have a coffee that has a natural slow flow rate, let's say a wash process, high elevation geisha, then I would spend more time doing center pours because it's a faster flow rate. If I work with like an infused coffee, which I would never do, then I would work with like circle pours because that's going to have a really fast flow rate anyway, right? So basically based on how the coffee is, again, roasted, but also to some degree these days processed, it's also going to dictate that flow rate.
Yep.
Pretty much,
What
right?
coffee are we using?
We're using a great coffee today, actually. We're using a coffee from a very small farm in Ecuador called Pico Caya. Ana Maria and Nicolas, two siblings. They're like 25 years old, which is pretty badass. They have a little farm that runs about 3 tons of coffee every single season, which in the world of coffee farming is like nothing, pretty much. They can do this because they own one of the largest rum manufacturing businesses in Latin America, pretty much. Basically, they're loaded. And coffee is like their hobby side project. Nice. They have a lot of really interesting varietals, so not on brewing, but basically my biggest interest in coffee is varietals. So I'm super interested in how different varietals can taste in different ways, right? Yep. This coffee is a great example because it's actually an Ethiopian varietal that was cultivated in Ethiopia and then actually brought into Ecuador through Nestle. So Nestle and Starbucks are in general doing some awesome work in origin countries. They sit on the largest kind of seed banks as well. Most of my favorite farms have actually originally got their varietals from either Starbucks or Nestle, because they actually share them for free pretty much. So they have this portfolio of varietals that then the producers would choose from. That's an interesting side story. So this process has gone through, or this coffee has gone through what we call a red honey process, which in their case is pretty much a full cherry, goes through a depulper with water, and you take away about 60% of the mucilage. So the fruit of the cherry. That depends a bit on the farm, but this is how they do it. Then they dry it for 4 weeks on raised beds, controlled humidity at 60%. And you just get a really yummy coffee. So the reason why I like Ethiopian or Kenyan varietals planted in Central South America is that you get the acidity structures, you get the flavor quality. So in this case, floral notes, a lot of citrusy characters, together with the kind of local terroir, which in this case mean, molasses, cane sugars, a little bit more browner. And it's something when those kind of world meets that is super interesting. You get that balance of sweetness, but also like flavor complexity. So how are we going to do this? Let's say I'm going to brew all of these. Then we're going to try to organize a little bit again, like cups, spoons, something like that. And we're going to try to at least, maybe we'll brew a few rounds. Yeah. That makes more sense.
Yeah, we got an hour before the session ends.
We do that.
We're going to do things a little differently from the standard, like if you were to do cupping and you slurp through your spoon. We don't want any saliva sharing stuff. So you're going to take out from the coffee and pour it into one of the plastic cups and you're going to drink from there, yeah? So no slurping from the spoon thing. Thank you.
We're gonna come back to that and walk you through. I have a plan. Basically, before I'm brewing, maybe I'm just going to do like a quick rundown of the different brewers. Do all of you know what these are, pretty much? Or is there someone here that
Anyone
goes like,
who doesn't know what
I've
these
never
are?
seen this in my life, which is super okay, also.
Don't be shy. Don't paise.
Nope. Okay,
like, just say it, like what's what, right?
I'm going to walk through.
Okay.
I don't even know half of these. There's like so many new coffee brewers in the world at the moment. And again, that's why I mentioned that again, we go up in a world championship, take second place. And most people that just launch coffee brewers, they just launch coffee brewers and send it to influencers and tell them it's good, right? Mm-hmm. So I like to think that's a good way to explain the difference between April and maybe other companies, right? We love all the other companies. It's just good to mention. Anyway, so April Brewer, which I've already talked way too much about. April brewer with custom April paper filter, which we've learned over this
You just
week.
converted me. We've been using Kalita for the longest time.
It's incredibly important, right? So I'm going to give you guys a tip. This is like an insider tip. If you ever want to compete in coffee, or if you ever want to be like very consistent when you brew, take like a micro scale and start measuring your paper filters. And you're going to realize that a big reason why Kalita, for example, is a bit all over the place brewing-wise, is the fact that there you have a very big range of different weights on the paper filters. So if you compete seriously in coffee, what do? Like you see someone with like this tiny micro scale, and you're like, paper filter, paper filter, paper filter. There is a range with April as well. Like it's still paper mass. It's going to have a range. And we're talking about 0.001, 0.02 difference. Tiny differences, but it's going to make a big difference, right? Because paper filter is all about weight, and it's all about microns. So if something weighs more than the other, obviously it's going to brew differently, right?
Yep.
So that's just something to have in mind, and that's why we have custom paper filters.
Yes, so.
That's why you don't put a Kalita filter in an April brewer. Ever. You could, of course.
I will burn
it's just
them
not going
now.
to taste so good, but you could. No, but it's an important thing, right? And obviously some of these guys that we have up here had their own paper filters as well. Now I actually shoved April filters into Origami and into Oria, which we talk about, and then Kalita has Kalita filter, and V60 has V60 filter, right? But basically, and I did not make this selection. This is a random selection by these guys, so I'm not like partial here, right? So Oria, I believe, I have very little insight. He sent me one, the dude that makes it, and asked me to make a YouTube video of it, which we didn't do. Maybe in the future. Like Flatbed Brewer, I think what he does, like he is a style of a brewer that basically, like Fellow is doing something very similar. They call it zero bypass brewing, which doesn't exist, so I'm very confused. It's like saying that you have like uniform grind size, also doesn't exist. It's just like in coffee, we have these irrelevant conversations that are just based on people not really kind of looking into things properly.
Yep.
Uniform grind size does not exist.
Yep.
If you have a particle measurer, which I have,
Yep.
then you will realize it doesn't exist, and it will never exist. And you don't need it to exist. That's also like one thing. It doesn't really make coffee taste better. But yeah, so these brewer basically claims you have zero bypass. There is one brewer that kind of has zero bypass.
What? The tricolate?
Tricolate, which is also terrible. It takes like 20 minutes to brew a coffee.
Taking shots here.
It's not terrible. It doesn't produce the cup of coffee that Patrik likes.
Yes. Yeah.
I respect that other people like.
Yes. Good one.
Yes. That's what it comes down to, right?
Yeah.
Again, coffee is like an inherently egoistic process, right? Where my job is to find a way to brew coffee that I like, right? Then I'm very happy if other people like it as well, right?
Yep.
But that's the mindset, right?
Yep.
So basically what happens, so zero bypass, and I assume part of that is that, so basically if you look at this brewer, he has very narrow kind of walls. And basically the more narrow the walls, the faster the flow rate. To some degree, but like that's the general idea, right? So if we took these brewers and we opened them up like this, we have a much slower flow rate because of the angles and because of the pressure, pretty much, right? I'm pretty sure he has his own paper filters. A lot of people is using this folding thing. Folding thing really doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
So I'm not doing that. That's about it. He's from the UK?
Yes.
He's from the UK.
Yes.
But he's producing in...
I have no idea.
No?
I know.
Okay.
I just bought two just to try.
Yeah, no.
Anyone have the Oria at home? Oria?
Cool. So you know when it's produced? Where it's produced?
Where is it produced? UK?
It's not produced in the UK.
Really?
He's based in the UK, but it's not produced.
Let me ask my friend Google.
Let's talk about that one. But yeah, that's a different side story. And nothing wrong with that if that's true. Cool, Kalita. We all know Kalita. They're from Japan. They're pretty awesome. Kalita, which I didn't know, is that they actually do a lot of the, like they have this awesome like copper version. I'm not sure if you've seen that. And that's actually then produced in recycled plastic. Yeah, but that's not this. Isn't that, okay, maybe it is. Isn't that just this?
I thought it was.
Anyway, he just Googled it. We don't know. Anyway, I'm sure it's great.
It says right here in the UK. That's what
Yeah.
it says. The base is.
At the base is, I don't think the rest is. I'm pretty sure that's China.
Doesn't say. Yeah.
That's a different thing.
Doesn't say.
It's like the Comandante grinder. People think it's made in Germany. And yeah. Transparency should be a thing.
Yep.
Yeah. let's move on. So Kalita is pretty epic. I have absolutely nothing evil to say about Kalita. They're fantastic. They're super important. Like both Kalita and V60 are like super important brewers, right? They're the reason why I'm like brewing coffee and why most of us are brewing coffee around the world, right? Kalita, I'm not sure exactly what the idea initially is from the brewer. I never talked to anyone at Kalita. But they have these, it's interesting when they do production because they actually produce in very relevant Japanese factories. So that's why I mentioned like the copper one. Because if you study where the copper one is actually produced, it's like one of the oldest factories of manufacturers in Japan. So it's this really interesting like heritage to it, which I think I support. I think they're super cool. There's obviously some issues with clogging. There's obviously a paper filter that is very ununiform. But it's still pretty awesome, so I don't want to like trash it too much. It's just, again, it's made for a style of roasting that is just a little bit more old school, right? And there's nothing wrong with that as well, right? Again, it's about finding a brewer that, one, makes coffee the way you like coffee, and two, makes coffee in a way that fits with the roasted coffee that you're trying to brew, right? Origami, love Origami actually. I have no, like, they're amazing, and their founder is amazing. I keep on bumping into him all the time. He's the goofiest guy, but super cool, and I think they've done some really good stuff. We have the plastic, yeah? Yep. He has a ceramic version. Kalita obviously have a bunch of different versions. Origami, what can I say? I think they tried to do like a hybrid V60 Kalita. It's one of the first brewers that kind of, you can choose if you want to use it as a cone brewer or if you want to use it as a flatbed brewer.
Yeah, the Origami, yeah.
If you guys listen to what I said before, you know I'm going to use it as a flatbed brewer. No harm in using it as a V60 either. I mean, you could. Made in Japan, super nice guy. Can make good coffee, right? There's no harm in that. The main difference between that and April is just the angles of the brewer. It's just going to cost a slightly different flow rate. So this is obviously a more open up brewer, right?
Yep.
So that's one thing to consider. V60, we have a, why do we only have plastic brewers here today, actually?
Do you want the glass one?
No.
Yeah.
So V60 plastic obviously comes in different sizes. V60 is great. In general, I find it doesn't work with my coffee. The flow rate doesn't match. It's too unstructured, too acidic, and I'm a guy that loves acidity. I don't get the balance I'm looking for. So honestly, I haven't brewed in a V60 in a very long time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's super cool. One thing we can mention actually is obviously like today there's like individual paper filter companies that is doing like specific paper filters for different brewers.
Yeah.
So it's worth checking out. It's kind of cool. Do we have an Origami paper filter? I didn't see that. Okay, but then we throw out the flatbed and we do the Origami.
Sure.
No, we do that second round. Anyway, you have these guys, Cafe, right?
Yeah.
They're super cool.
Yeah.
They do a lot of awesome paper filters. I thought they only did for Kono, but maybe they do for everyone.
They have their own brewer now.
They do?
Right.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Are these the guys that makes the
Cafe flour or something like that? Yeah.
Love that brewer actually.
Really? The
Oh
Cafe
yeah,
flour?
super good.
Yeah.
It's the best cone brewer.
Right.
So the Japanese guy that was second in Milan, was he? Am I confused? I don't know. He used that,
right.
and that's super good. Like I'm really. He actually gave me one of his.
Nice.
Yeah, super cool. So paper filter matters. Material is a conversation that we keep on kind of bringing up in the world of coffee brewing. It's a little bit silly because I think a lot of people are confusing the actual individual kind of aspects of the material and what we're doing. This is a very small system, coffee brewing, right? It's tiny and it's open, it's fully exposed. So saying that, for example, a ceramic version of a Kalita versus a glass version would have such a different heat retention version of plastic doesn't really make much sense. Especially when it comes to plastic. Everyone buys a plastic brewer now from April. It's like, that's our best-selling brewer by far, right? One, because it doesn't break sometimes.
Yes.
Clearly it can break.
No.
But two, because they say the heat retention is better, right? It's not really true though. Like actually not. If you measure that properly, not with like a hobby thing that people do at home. There is a slight difference, but it's a very insignificant difference, right? So what it comes down for me is that when you produce stuff, you realize that the style of production is in some way prohibiting certain styles of designs. So if you look at the April glass brewer, porcelain brewer, plastic brewer, soon to come wood brewer,
Yep.
it's like my favorite, then they all have slightly different design. But one of the reasons for that is also just how we manufacturing it. So glass handmade. Everything that is handmade is kind of difficult to do in certain ways, right? So then you have to adapt the design for it. Porcelain that we do in Germany, same thing. Difficult. It's a mold. You have to build a mold that can last, right? So you can't do it 100% maybe the way they want to, even though it's a great brewer. Plastic, you kind of can do whatever you want, which is pretty cool. So that's actually the most, let's say, scientific version of all of them.
Nice.
Because it's the one that actually lives up to the equation we use to calculate the different dimensions.
Right.
So it's like the baseline of everything we do is the plastic.
Yeah.
And when you do plastic, you can actually make it the way that you want to,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So are we brewing coffee?
I have to say, yeah, sorry. And again, if you guys have questions, now is like when you should be asking questions.
Clear the water.
I'm just going to brew a bit of coffee here. And if you guys, I don't know, want to see or whatever, you're welcome to also come up or thank you. Or again, ask questions. What water? So for filter brewing, we're between 30 and 40. For espresso brewing, 50 and 60. Copenhagen water is really bad, the base water. So fully RO'd stuff, pretty much. And then we just build in minerals after that. Yep. We try to stay away from magnesium. Magnesium in coffee doesn't work. You need it, but like smallest amount possible. I know in the roasting, like in the Brewers Cup world, it was very famous to chuck a bunch of magnesium afterwards because it makes it a bit chewy. But it only works on the like dark roasted fermenty stuff. If you want to do clean stuff, it doesn't help you. There is a really cool. I mean, there's a lot of cool kind of brewing waters you can use for home. I'm a big fan of Third Wave water. I have no like official collaboration with them whatsoever. I'm just like a fan. It's what I used when I competed in the World Brewers and stuff like that, right? This guy has been playing around with the Lotus. Is that the name? Which should also be a cool thing. I don't know. I haven't tried it enough to really say. But basically it matters, right? Grinders matter. We can have like a 1 week long sessions on coffee grinders, right?
Yeah,
like,
we covered a little bit of grinders in session 1 of coffee salon sessions.
Did we?
Yeah, I did.
You did?
Yeah.
That's cool. So basically what I'm doing here, I'm doing a simple 2-step pour. 100. Each pour is 10 seconds long, so again, it's important how long the actual pour is as well. 40 grams this goes in a circle, and 60 grams goes in a center. And this is going to change depending on the coffee. And this is again just to adjust flow rate. And then we walk through a little bit like how does the coffee bed actually look? What is the actual brew times? Obviously now for educational purposes, we are dosing this the same, grinding this the same, pouring this the same. Which is obviously not the best way to compare brewers. Let's be honest about that. Because each brewer would actually benefit from having a more customized approach. Yep. But I tried it a few times now, and I think it actually works pretty well. The idea here is to obviously show good quality of all brewers. So we're not sabotaging. Like it tastes pretty good on all of them. I just want you guys to be able to like taste the difference. So again, the reason for that big initial 100 gram pour is to saturate. Saturate is everything when you brew coffee.
Do you want to pour them into these glass?
No,
cups?
I think we like put the servers, and they can actually take like from the server into their cups, because we can have one spoon per server, and then they just like spoon it. I'll show you.
But you can't brew again after that, right?
Yeah, I can like if we have more doses, we can just do a few of them.
Okay.
I can keep on brewing. If people have some questions, maybe. Obviously, pouring kettles you can discuss as well. So one of the things you should consider when you pour is pouring height. No like random up and down stuff. Keep it at the same level. where you put that level matters. It controls the amount of agitation you have on the top part of the coffee, not the bottom part of the coffee.
Right.
It's kind of like when we use distribution tools when we brew espresso, they're like useless because they make the top look really pretty, but then the bottom is not distributed.
Yep.
It's the same thing here pretty much, right? So if you have a lot of agitation, that affects the top part of your brew and not so much the bottom. So you just want to be uniform. That's like the key thing, always. So pouring height, pouring speed is something that we don't talk a lot about, right? So it's not just pour X amount of grams in a certain amount of time, or like just pour an X amount of grams. It's obviously how much time do you spend pouring, right? When you compete in coffee, this becomes really easy because you have someone literally standing next to you, noting down all your pours, right? So then you start going, maybe this matters. And I think that's kind of important. So yeah, obviously out of the first set, the Oria is going to be the fastest one because of the shape. Kalita is going to be the slowest one. That's kind of consistent. And I will put all of them here, so if we always talk about coffee beds in the coffee industry, which is also interesting. But if you want to have a look, then you're welcome to have a look. Let's try these before they get cold. So in my head, this makes sense. And I think we're going to have to do this a little bit in like portions. And not everyone has to do it if you don't want to do it. But if you want to do it, I think we're going to take like spoon, one server, spoon a little bit of coffee into a cup, taste that, and then like jump to the next one. Does that make sense? Yeah? We try to be a little bit organized and civilized. And then I'm just going to, do we have more doses, Grant? You fix more doses? Then I'm just going to brew a little bit more, and then like feel free to kind of jump in, have some taste. And then we'll see what we end up doing after that. Yeah?
Thank you for watching. This was a little bit of different content here. We're trying something new as we kind of travel the world. It's interesting to have different perspectives on our little YouTube channel here. If you want more content, stay tuned for the next video, or make sure you check us out on Patreon as well, where you see all of these behind the scenes stuff that is going on here at April. Thank you for watching. We want to give a special thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. It's because of you that we are able to continue to make these videos. And we want you all to feel free to always come with suggestions and ideas on the content that you want to see, because we are doing this for you and because of you. Thank you from all of us here at April.